The City of St. Pete Beach City Commission Budget Workshop. Today is Tuesday, August 26, 2025. It is 4:30 p.m. Let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
City Clerk, if you'll please call roll.
Vice Mayor Marriott. Here. Commissioner Robinson. Here. Commissioner Ruznicki.
Here.
Commissioner Maldonado.
Here.
And Mayor Petrilla.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, Mayor and Commission. My name is Devin Schmidt. I am the Finance Director for the City of St. Pete Beach. This afternoon, I'll be taking you through our workshop number 5, which is focused on our tentative budget for consideration. So starting off, we'll be looking at the recommendation of changes from the Finance Budget Review Committee. We'll be going through some summary of changes, what we're looking at for the Government Finance Officers Association additions to our budget packet. We'll look at a performance management system, and we'll walk through our financial policies review, and then we'll discuss what the next steps are in the timeline for our budget process. So starting it off, and when we're looking at our Finance Budget Review Committee recommendations, first off, the committee had consensus on the tentative budget, meaning that they didn't request any changes to any of the figures or information. When we're looking at the financial policy recommendations, the Finance Budget Review Committee did ask that we clarify what quarterly reports would be included on a quarterly basis to the Commission. So that would include our balance sheet items, income statement, fund balance reports, as well as reports comparing our budget to actuals and expenditures for the Commission. And then the second request was to look at not just federal and state, but also nonprofit grants when we're looking at some of our fiscal impacts. Other recommendations included making a change on our FY25 column to a year-to-date label instead of having that say actual or a date through. There was a request to change the November 5th meeting to begin at 3 p.m. Clarification on executive salaries, that should be our city manager's office, clerk, and commission, and so we'll make that change in our system reflective. To ensure that we have scrutiny and make sure that no budgetary or actual waste is occurring between now and October as we start to wrap the end of the fiscal year. Look to continue to improve our financial relationship that we have with the county, so how can we bring back more of those dollars locally? Look to codify a statement as a city. So what does that look like? What is the policy? Could that be taken to the big C to improve that relationship there? And then looking at our next steps. So on November 5th with the Finance Budget Review Committee, we'll be going through sort of an after action, what worked well in this fiscal year budget process, what should we change for fiscal year 2027? And then there is a request by the committee for us to look at a mapping opportunity where we're overlaying our capital projects with the revenues that are generated for each district, and that'll occur after our January timeframe with that committee. So starting it off with some of our introductory and summary of changes. This budget book is aligning with the Government Finance Officers Association best practices. The reason why that matters for the city is, one, it'll bring us in with other 1,900 local governments, so whether that's state, county, municipality, and what we're looking for there is not the award. That's not the reason why we apply for these things. What we're looking at for there is for the National Advisory Council to go through and look at our budget and share whether or not we are utilizing government best practice best practices recognized by the board. So each year when we submit this, it's an opportunity of continuous improvement for us. as a city to show how we can do better. So some of those areas that we have added for alignment is one, a city manager message, so you can come inside and understand what challenges and opportunities we were looking at as we were preparing this fiscal year budget. A community profile, so that's important to understand the demographics of our community when we're looking at what amenities, what opportunities we have as a community, how we should reflect that in our budgetary spend. The strategic roadmap and alignment, so at the highest policy level, how does our budget align with what the commission has set forward? And then financial policies. This is an addition that we'll be adding, that we've added to the budget process, and we're requesting that this be considered annually by the commission and the Finance Budget Review Committee. So that gives an opportunity for the commission and the Finance Budget Review Committee to look at those policies on an annual basis, make recommendation and changes based on what the picture looks like for the city in that given calendar year. The budget calendar and approval process, so how does it look, what's happening behind the scenes with staff as we're preparing the budget, what are the layers that we're bringing it through with the Finance Budget Review Committee, and then what opportunities is there for public engagement, what opportunities do we go through with this commission and make changes, and then an understanding of our largest revenue sources, trends, and history. Has all been incorporated into this budget, and that gives us the opportunity to look at our past so we can determine how we can move as a city for the future. So starting off, we wanted to highlight some of our fund balance changes, and I think an important note that came out of the Finance Budget Review Committee to start off. So you can see here that the city completed its annual comprehensive financial report on July 31st. So prior workshops included unaudited financials. This resulted in the discovery of a $5.8 million that was a reserve for coastal resiliency that was earmarked by a prior commission. I think the point here for the public and for the commission to understand is that the city didn't find $5.8 million. It was always on the balance sheet, and that's was a really good call out that we had as a result from the Finance Budget Review Committee. So moving forward, and how do we prepare for future? We will be completing our annual comprehensive financial report and our audit in March to really kick off the budget. Since those beginning prior fiscal year numbers are our starting point for our budget process. This did allow for the city to utilize that $5.8 million for resiliency projects and fine-tune some of those financial policies that we'll walk this commission through in some later slides. In addition, I think it's important to note that what we're looking at or recommending is that anything above 35% for our operating expenditures be transferred to either a capital projects fund or a resiliency fund to ensure that we meet the needs of the commission, but also looking to address any recovery, infrastructure, resiliency projects. So looking at our summary of changes, what we have here is, the city staff went back after the last commission meeting and really looked to kind of sharpen our pencil and look at the budget. So one of the items that we have here is looking at the implementation of a performance evaluation for employees to reward and recognize high performance that would look at including a 1.5% for the January implementation of a STEP plan. So what we currently have in the budget is looking at 1.5% across the board for our employees. So how that equates, or what the different options are, as the leadership team continues to develop this plan. One would be if an employee is in that metric that's under performance, that they would be on a performance improvement plan. Plus, we would hold over our cost of living adjustment until that minimum performance standard is met. Second would be meets performance, so that employee would receive the cost of living adjustment. Currently factored into this budget is 2.6%, and that has to do with our regional consumer price index that we've been looking at. Good performance, so that employee is showing positive, really good performance. They could receive a cost of living adjustment plus a 1%. And then our high performers, these are the 20% of the organization that goes above and beyond every single day in their job. They would be looking at receiving a cost of living adjustment plus a potential 2% increase. So we do have that factored into this edition of the budget. I talked about that 5.8 million that the city is recommending we divert from our general fund over to the resiliency fund. And so what those projects are looking at, we worked with our public services department to go through and understand what projects might meet that criteria. So some of those projects include our shoreline protection improvements, the community center seawall, watershed management master plan, and then the Northwest, Don Cesar, Boca Ciega, and the Northwest region adaptation projects. The other component that we have included in here, so historically the city has budgeted with the intent that we are 100% staffed. We know just based on natural attrition and some of our larger departments that the expectation is that we would have turnover. So we're budgeting for a vacancy for those departments that would have that natural turnover to help us achieve closer to that 96% budget to actual variance that the city is striving for. In addition, this does include any reappropriation projects. So for our reappropriation projects that are maybe straddling 2 fiscal years from September to October from 25 to 26 would include our public services, building improvements, our fire station 22, the VA shuffleboard rebuilding, right-of-way median improvements, Gulf Boulevard utility underground, Egan Park site improvements, the dune walkover replacements, and the community center seawall replacements. And then in an effort once again to sharpen our pencils, we did look at removing the replacement of some of our vehicles in our code department. Originally we were looking to replace some of our electric vehicles in the sense that they're not the best vehicles to respond during an emergency, but we decided to hold those over for at least another fiscal year. So I talked about these items already, but this is what we're looking at from workshop number 4, either an increase or a decrease into workshop number 5. So those are the actual figures that we have discussed in the prior slide. I'm not going to read. This is our city manager's budget message. So I'm not going to read this for the commission. It was included in the packet as part of the budget. But I think the most important part for us to understand is that the reason why you include a city manager message is 1, transparency, 2, so you can understand the thought process of how we were developing the budget. And then, you know, what are the true costs to run a premier city? So like I said, I won't read that, so I'll click through some of these slides here. We do also have included in there our organizational chart. No changes there. And then moving into our demographic information. So again, I mentioned this at the beginning, but the reason why you include this information is to ensure from our community profile or community overview, as we're looking at our budget, how are we meeting the needs of the different residents that exist within our community? So that's the biggest piece there. I won't take you all through each one of these different areas. Okay, so diving into our financial policies that are included in the budget. A lot of these policies are areas that the city was already doing, whether documented through our annual comprehensive financial report or through a standard operating procedure. The reason why we're bringing these forward as part of the budget process is 1, for transparency purposes, so anyone can understand this is how we are looking to run the city from a financial perspective, but then also the opportunity for the commission to modify or change. So when we're looking at this first slide, these are the different fund types managed by the city. So we have governmental or we have proprietary funds. The other component that is nice about this is that it gives us the opportunity, if the city manager, the commission, or the finance budget review committee would like to add an additional fund, this gives us the opportunity to make those changes each year throughout the budget process. So at the very highest level, this talks about the different funds that we are managing as a city. So moving on into our budget policies and procedures, so some highlights that we have within here. So first and foremost, the city will comply with all of our federal, state, and local requirements, and that we will also bring forward a structured budget with public opportunities for comment, that will be posting the online budget for our resident review and comment. though we will have the 2 public hearings before our final adoption that will be looking at our multi-year revenues and expenditure forecast to help us guide an effective financial plan. In a given year where our revenues might be a little tight, we would look to prioritize essential services first, unless the commission directs otherwise. For our cost management, that's where we'd be looking at some of our lower priority services, any opportunities if we needed to reduce or eliminate some of those areas. And then for our workforce stability, we would strive to avoid any layoffs of our permanent employees using attrition where possible. We'd also have the opportunity for existing employees to be encouraged to apply for any open positions by way of a department was looking at doing a restructure. And then fiscal responsibility, we'd be looking at our current expenditures are paid with current revenues and reserves, so looking at not funding long-term debt for our operational costs. So moving on with our financial policies, we're still in our budget policies. So the city would be looking at our budget best practices, so we wouldn't be looking to push our today's costs into future, so looking to not postpone any critical expenses or rolling over any short-term debt. We would have the budget to ensure that adequate maintenance and timely replacement of our capital assets and equipment are in a replacement fund to fund those future needs that we have as a city. In our debt, we would obviously ensure that we have sufficient funding provided to pay for any of our annual debt payments, and that we would also look at cost-effective opportunities such as technology or capital investments that would help us reduce any operating costs. We have strong budgetary controls that are in place, including an encumbrance system. Again, this is also looking at bringing those quarterly financial reports to the commission and that have those different areas that I've already talked about. Our service levels and performance measures, this is something we're going to strive to look to in 2027, where we would take departmental performance measures and metrics and inlay those into the budget, so at any given time, at least on an annual basis, the commission and the community could see how our performance metrics tracking towards the budget. As it relates to surplus property, we would be offering any surplus or obsolete property auctioned at least once a year. We've talked a lot about this, our enterprise fund self-sufficiency. So the intent would be that those enterprise funds are self-sustaining and operate more of like a business unit than they currently are today. For our staffing controls, we'd be looking at the number of approved FTEs cannot exceed without commission approval. So that total number of FTEs would be brought to commission each year. And if any changes, those would be brought to the commission as well. We're looking at making sure that we have coordinated planning as it relates to our capital improvement plan. So as we're adding in any capital projects, how does that impact our operating budget? So if the commission said we want you to add, for example, a pickleball court, what does it cost to maintain and manage that pickleball court on an operating basis? And then our commitment to excellence. So starting this year, this will be the first year that the city has applied for the Government Finance Officers Association Distinguished Budget Award. So every year we'll be looking to submit that award and make sure that we are complying and putting forward those best practice initiatives. Moving on and looking at our basis of budgetary accounting. So what we're looking at here is that within our funds, we would follow the governmental accounting procedures with our modified accrual basis, and our proprietary funds that we would use a full accrual. So those are just looking at in some areas where we wouldn't necessarily budget for our depreciation is a good example of that. So moving on, looking at this slide, so our budget development process, excuse me, a little tongue-tied there. The city manager would propose a budget before September 1st. Now we've been meeting with this commission in a workshop format and bringing forward as we're going through the budget process that we would at the very least have 2 public hearings before the budget is adopted by ordinance. And then looking at any of those budget adoptions and transfers. So The annual budgets are adopted for all major funds and departments, and the city manager can transfer funds between departments. Transfers between departments or funds do require commission approval, and the commission can amend the budget for a supplemental appropriation by being brought forth by way of ordinance. So a mid-year budget ordinance is what we would look at doing. And then with our encumbrance accounting, we would look at any of our outstanding purchase orders at year end to make sure that we are bringing those forward, and that's where we're looking at those 2025 projects that I already spoke about, reappropriating that budget each year. So when we're looking at our fund structure, this is just a table that's showing the community, the commission, as well as the departments, how we're looking at our department fund relationship. So at the highest level, is the fund considered governmental, or is it proprietary or an enterprise fund? And then what department, where does that department exist in each one of those funds, or where do they have some budgetary authority as we're looking at these funds? Okay, moving on in our financial policies. So this is our fund balance and reserve policy that we're bringing forward for the commission to consider. So what we're looking at here is that the city would establish an unassigned fund balance to the general fund for emergency purposes and liquidity purposes of 25%. Now that we know, and I'll show this in some of our future slides, but now that we know kind of a worst case, or hopefully a worst case scenario when we're looking at Helene and Milton, that cost us around $9 million. That's why we're recommending an additional 10% for a hurricane emergency contingency reserve. So in total, we'd be looking at a 35% fund balance reserve on a given year on operating expenditures, minusing out any transfers for capital projects or things of that nature. And you can see on this slide, we're also showing what those different categories of a fund balance looks like on a balance sheet. So moving on into our revenue policies, what we're showing here and some of those key points is that we would bring the commission each year after we receive the preliminary tax rolls on July 1st. We would bring the commission each year the opportunity to look at how they would like us to move from a policy direction on that millage rate. Should we look at a rollback? Should we look at keeping it the same, the 2/3 or the max vote? So bringing that opportunity forward each year. For our user fees, the commission is aware that we're going through several different fee studies. So how are we looking at recovering the cost of those services, and what opportunities do we need to change those fees on an annual basis? Looking at some of our revenue flexibility, so we would look to avoid just targeting specific revenues for any special programs, which would allow for us to have flexibility. That does not mean, however, though, that we wouldn't seek any opportunities for grants, whether those are federal or state or nonprofit, as mentioned in the Finance Budget Review Committee. So moving on to our next slide, this is looking at some of our cash management and investment policies. So when we're looking at, first and foremost, under our debt management and financial controls, so the city would be looking at prioritizing special assessment or self-supporting bonds over general obligation bonds. So that means that we wouldn't look to bond against that ad valorem tax. General obligation bonds are capped at 10%, and the city's non-exempt assessed property value. So essentially their term could not exceed the useful life of a project. Each bond issue, we would look to have an official statement and a bond issuance of the purchase if cost effective. And then general obligation debt is not used for any of our enterprise fund activities, since those are meant to be like business-like funds. When we're looking at our cash management investments and investments, we would be looking to make sure that we deposit our cash within 72 hours of receipt, that the city aggressively collects any revenues, including past due bills, and if we need to use outside agencies to collect those funds. For our cash management investment, that we would make sure that we can meet our daily cash needs as well as maximize our returns, but ensure that anything we're investing in has a level of security based on our city's investment policy. And then we would be looking to bring a quarterly investment report presented to our Finance Budget Review Committee. And then on the next area that we're looking at under auditing, accounting, and financial reporting, that we obviously do an independent audit that's conducted annually that includes a management letter just to ensure that we have the transparency and accountability on what we completed for the year prior. So a continuation on here, looking at our capital improvement plan policy. Some of this information that we're showing here is looking at how we're considering and what our opportunities are to look at an asset and determine what's the estimated useful life of that asset and what is the depreciation schedule. The other part that's important when we're looking at the budget is anything over that $20,000 is that we would look to include that as part of our capital improvement plan and how long out we can create that capital improvement plan. So what's included in this budget is a 5-year capital improvement plan. We will be looking to get closer to a 10-year capital improvement plan in our future budget cycles. And then looking at kind of the information as we're thinking about our capital improvement plan budget, how are we able to ensure that we are including those operating costs? So that's a little bit of what this is talking about. And then when we're looking at the ranking system, part of our after action of this budget process will be to bring to the Finance Budget Review Committee, as well as the Commission, good prioritization ranking of our capital projects. So in one year, we might determine that we're not always going to be in a restore period, and the Commission might say, hey, we'd like to look at enhancing projects. So how can we be flexible in that capital improvement plan policy where we can make enhanced projects be a higher level than maybe a recovery project, which is where we're at today. So looking at our budget calendar, all of the kind of yellow highlighted section is meant to show what all of these folks behind me are working on in between or before we even bring the budget workshop to the Finance Budget Review Committee or to the Commission. So there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes of the budget process. Then we're bringing it to the Finance Budget Review Committee, which provides another opportunity for engagement from the public or even visibility of the budget process. And then we have each one of the Commission workshops where we have broken down in smaller bite-sized pieces the budget process for you all. So this is just a chart showing kind of how that process looks and when we're looking to achieve the different processes. I will tell you, on our financial policies, we did look at the Government Finance Officers Associations. They have a fiscal policy challenge where they go out and they take policies that were submitted by other governments that are modeled policies. And so that was a launch point for us as we were going through and looking at how can we bring forward the best policies for the city of St. Pete Beach. We also looked at what exists currently in our charter and then what exists currently in our annual comprehensive report or any other policies that we might already have in place to bring a full package of policies for the Commission. Before I dive into the financial summaries and review, I want to pause for a moment and answer any questions or take any feedback on the policies from the Commission.
I had a question in regards to public input. At which points are the 2 meetings that we're discussing that public input? And I know that we did post something, and I asked that there be some sort of instructions on how to do, because it didn't have a link to do anything in writing or to put any input in, or did it say where to go, what meetings to attend?
Sure. So I believe it was workshop number 3 or 4. We did post that entire budget book on the city website, as well as my contact information, and included that in the weekly city manager ops information. And then most recently, we included an additional kind of a continuation of this workshop this evening if folks wanted to come and provide comment. And then what we typically do every year is at that first meeting for the public hearing, which is September 8th, That's when we'll have the first reading and we can receive any public comment and hearing there. And then the second public hearing as well. I will tell the commission that I have received at least 4 opportunities for input from citizens that have provided some information. And I would like to summarize some of that, send that out so you have it for your constituents and understand kind of the questions that they're asking. So I think, moving forward, it's a good option. Next year, what I would like to include is either an engagement forum where it's a little informal and if the residents want to come and ask questions, or even a budget town hall that gives the opportunity of a quick presentation from me, and then we can hear from the public as another opportunity for engagement throughout the process.
Yeah, I think that would be a great idea, because the city manager's operational report, I have not seen that go out to the general public.
I believe it's posted on the website. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's available, but you have to go
Hard
to the
find.
website.
It's extremely hard to find, yeah. It's nothing right out there for the public. I did see the last listing on, I think it was on Nextdoor or on social media, note regarding public input. And again, as I'd mentioned, but it didn't have anything as to how to do that.
Got it.
So that's always helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah, and this is the type of feedback that really helps us continue to fine-tune these budgetary practices. And really looking forward to that after action with the commission as well as the Finance Budget Review Committee, so we can see every year as a commission how you would like us to collect that engagement, or wherever else there's opportunities for improvement for us. It's really helpful. So thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question. And you said you were summarizing and you're going to send us those comments, the current comments. Is that going to be before September's commission meeting? Okay, thank you.
It should be by the end of the week. And then anything else that comes in, since it's a bit of an open-ended invitation for residents, I'm happy to weekly or daily as I receive those and respond to them. I'm happy to send those.
Okay. Questions on policies. Are these policies that you just went over with us new recommendations that you're bringing to the commission, or are these current existing policies that are standing right now?
So I would say they're practices that we have been doing either in finance or as a city. What this is doing is almost giving a handbook or an understanding for anybody in the public or the commission to understand on an annual basis, this is how we were running the city at this time period. It's a best practice of GFOA that you include these financial policies as part of your budget process. But in order to ensure flexibility and opportunities for us to make changes to that, that's why I'm recommending that we do it as part of the budget process instead of a separate standalone policy.
Okay, so there's nothing, it's hard for me to look at the packet to understand whether you're recommending something new, like you mentioned, like the 30, I think you said 35%, but I think I saw written was 25% for the rainy day fund, right? Is that completely new, or, I mean, from my understanding, it existed already. So my point is, how do I know what the change is if you're recommending a change, or is it new? Is it an old policy? How would we know that?
I could go through and maybe point to some areas that were either part of the annual comprehensive financial report, if that would be helpful. But I would say that these financial policies would take precedence over anything that was prior. We know that there was a resolution that set up the initial coastal vulnerabilities fund. So in my mind, what this would do is it would take over or set the new precedents, and this is our financial policies for the city.
And I mean, that's a good example too, because that's an existing policy, right? The coastal vulnerabilities policy existed, which took a percentage, and now we're being given a recommendation to move it elsewhere. So, and hopefully we'll get into a little discussion after about that, because it's kind of uncomfortable for me to see that we just like change something really fast, you know? Like, if it existed already and we had a fund established for it, how things change. And that's what I'm trying to get a grasp of, is why are we getting recommended this new policy if it already existed?
Well, let me clarify on that. We'll keep that example. So your policy is actually a resiliency fund out of the comp plan. This coastal fund name does not match the comp plan name. So we've essentially created the fund, this new fund, to match the comprehensive plan name. And we have left a fund balance, which Devin will go over in the future. But the prior fund was set up as kind of an emergency fund for a hurricane and a bunch of other things. So it was essentially this restricted fund that could run anything, could be used for anything, but it was restricted, so it created these operational inefficiencies during an emergency. So I would call this a cleanup, because the resiliency fund that was created had only the $650,000 grant that we had received from the state for Don Cesar. So some of this is a cleanup. Second, I will use the reserve policies as an example. You had none. So those are brand new, and we're basically saying you should have a reserve policy, and we are managing to that reserve policy to make sure that we always have available funds for emergencies. And so that's new. So when Devin says practices, when you have a new city manager show up or a new finance director, we're literally trying to figure out from institutional knowledge what this city did. This basically says this is what we did today, and if the commission wants to change it anytime, they can. I mean, you could call up anything at any time, but typically you'd wait for the budget process. And if those policies for some reason aren't working, but now we have a guideline to point to, and if we bring an action to you, we're going to say, during the budget, you adopted this policy, we're recommending to go this direction, and you can still change your mind. But the point is, now we actually have these documented, where before they were just practices, and so we're trying to figure out what people are doing and why people are doing it.
It kind of, it doesn't really answer my concern, is because this, I mean, it was a 2022 resolution that was established for coastal vulnerabilities, right? We have minutes upon minutes, and trust me, I did a lot of research and went back into a lot of commission meetings and budget review boards, and kept hearing about this, right? And that there's an established policy, and maybe the city attorney could help later on explain how, commission establishes a policy. And I mean, I know we could have a new commission, another new commission can come, and whatever we say could change, but what's the formality of changing something like that? In September 9th of this past year, 2024, weeks before the hurricane, we approved, or we talked about a budget, and in one of the line items, it was coastal vulnerabilities. So it was not something no one sitting here didn't see. It was in this current commission's approval. So how did we not catch that? So I have questions about that. And we went into a hurricane. The fund was established for that rainy day emergency. We just had one. You just said a little while ago about $9 million that maybe we've spent so far and haven't recovered, right, from the two, Milton and Helene, or that we might be getting reimbursements or insurance or whatever it may be. But isn't that what that fund was for? So it kind of, I still have so many questions about that whole thing, and hopefully we could have some kind of discussion about that, because I remember the resiliency fund, and I do remember times when, and I went through meetings where we had put money, and I'm not saying we as this commission, because there was prior commissions during that time that were put into that fund, and I'm aware of the ones for the Don Cesar because I was involved back then on those, but we had them on our budgets. They were on audits. Our audited reports talk about this coastal vulnerability and what a great policy it was. So that's why I question, how can we just, in this last budget workshop, we just found, and I hate to say found because it makes it sound like we didn't know anything about this, but that all of a sudden we have this $5.8 million that we can move to resiliency fund, which at the last budget workshop, we had $0. So, and I know we said it's not cash, well, but then that's very confusing for me. So anyway, my concerns about policies, right? How can we change it? And is it that easy that we just say, remove what we'd had before established, and again, I'm not saying we current sitting here, but that something had been established, it was a resolution, and now we're just going to move it to a resiliency fund instead, which are two different things. Coastal vulnerability is not the same thing as resiliency. Resiliency is forward-thinking, future, right? We're trying to improve the city. Vulnerabilities, from what I've read, was we have a hurricane, we need to recover, right? We have money in reserves to help us recover.
So maybe it'll be helpful if Devin goes through these financial summaries, because she's going to show you where we've put money aside to recover, and we've kept the resiliency,
The vulnerabilities, or
the resiliency fund that was supposed to be created through the comp plan, your vulnerabilities now is in your reserve policy. You did not have a reserve policy. So what we understand is the prior commission said we need to create this vulnerabilities fund
right?
for a hurricane because you had no reserve policy. We're coming in and saying we are going to create a 35% reserve policy, and we don't need the 5.8 million because we've balanced this budget with a fund balance high enough to do that. So maybe have it once Devin goes through that.
It would be two separate things,
Yes,
basically.
exactly.
So can we
Yes.
keep the name? I mean, why couldn't we keep coastal vulnerabilities and resiliency fund if they're two,
We can do whatever the commission would like us to do.
Commissioner Robinson?
I had another question in regards to I believe I'm going to quote this correct, 96% budget to variance goal. I just want to be very clear on, because I know when we talked about that at one of our workshops, it was also stated, we weren't going to spend the money if we didn't necessarily need it. So I get concerned that there's this goal to get it done and spend the money, but then we're saying on the backside that if it's not not necessary right now, not to spend it. So who is the gatekeeper on that, and how does that work?
So I would say early on in the budget process, after we received all of so we did it in several tranches through the workshop. So we started with the capital projects, and we went through and we showed this commission and the Finance Budget Review Committee, here is the list of infrastructure needs, the entire list that the community needs. Then once we got through the capital projects, we went through and did the prioritization ranking. Fast forward to any personnel or operating, while we were doing that, we were also looking at those items. And what we did is myself and the city manager sat down with each department director and went through every line item in their budget. We asked them to itemize it. So if they needed a specific software, or if somebody said, I need a desk, or to that level of granularity, and we went through and we said, do you need that funding? Even training, what are the different training buckets that we're looking at? So we went through and asked those questions of the directors. And when we launched the process, we said, please don't ask for a budget item in this budget if you're not going to utilize it, especially when you're looking at, I would say the general fund, but our enterprise funds have those challenges as well. So if you're not going to utilize it, then you're going to hold budget over for a different department or a different need in the city, which is similar to that budgetary vacancy in the sense that we're not going to hold budget over for a position knowing that that department might have a natural turn rate. So those are the areas that we're looking at. And to your question about the 96%, if we are budgeting properly on revenues and expenditures, then the intent would be that we're trying to get as close to that budgetary number. So we're planning and we're saying this is what we intend to do. This is what we've heard from the commission, the communities, and this is what we're going to look to accomplish. And so holding that 96% is the intent there. It's not that between now and October that we would say, hey, guess what, you have all this funding, let's go spend it. That's not the intent at all. The intent is to really to think about it as a planning mechanism, because at its core, that's really what the intent of the budget is every year.
Yeah, I understand the intent, but in actuality, how it works is a different item. So just trying to clarify that on how that is going to work.
Sure, yeah, and I think, that would be one of the metrics that we could bring back to the Finance Budget Review Committee or the Commission, and just showing how well that's working or how well that's not working. But it definitely gives us at least a number to get to, and somewhat holds the city accountable for projects. If we're asking for the funding of the commission, then we must really need it, and not having these areas where we have a level of contingency within our operating funds. And that's the intent around that piece.
Thank you, Devin.
Do you have a comment slash question as well? So in terms of redundancy, we had talked about this previously when we sat down with the city manager. Can you just talk a little bit about what you're planning to do to mitigate gaps in terms of turnover and also just to enhance checks and balances?
Yeah, absolutely. So the finance team specifically, is that what you're looking?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So within our finance team, we have a lot of dedicated, very skilled members. I feel very lucky to walk into that department. The challenge is that we had 2 folks that left that had a lot of institutional knowledge, so there was gaps there. What we're doing now as we're moving forward is that we're cross-training the team so that we're, Francis always asked to look for any single points of failure. So where are those single points of failure? If somebody walks out the door and has that institutional knowledge, you'll see that my budget management analyst is behind me. She has the redundancy and the information to know what we're doing on a budget process. We're doing the same thing with every one of our areas: accounts payable, payroll, procurement, any one of those areas within finance, so that we have cross-training and we have that succession planning, if you will, and opportunities for staff to learn. The other thing that we're going to look to do, so that we're not in the situation at workshop number 5 and getting our annual comprehensive financial report on July 31st, is taking our audit schedule and collating that with the budget process, so that by the time March 31st comes around, and that's when we need to submit our annual comprehensive financial report and our audit, that then we're launching into the budget process with those audited financial numbers.
Thanks, Evan.
Commissioner?
Yeah, just a quick question. In the policies, you talked about I think somewhere in there it talked about the expenses being a modified accrual method of accounting, but it doesn't talk about in the cash management and investment policies, it doesn't talk about how the income is tracked. Is the income tracked on a cash basis when we receive it, or is it tracked on a more of an accrual method when we think we know it's coming?
Typically, it depends on 1, where we're at in the fiscal year, but 2, what type of income it is. So a grant, for example, we might take our expenditures, and then on the quarterly basis where we're doing the grant reimbursement, we might accrue that revenue and say, this is what we submitted up to the state for, or the feds for reimbursement. So that might be an accrual methodology. As we get closer to the end of the fiscal year, that's another area where we're looking to accrue those revenues. In a lot of cases, as it relates to our ad valorem, for example, we're receiving those on a monthly basis, and so that is more of a cash type of receivable. And we know just from looking at our month-to-month trends when we expect to receive those different revenue sources. So it a little bit depends on the income. We had a similar question at the Finance Budget Review Committee, so that'll be another one of those after actions that we owe back to them as well. So we'd be happy to share that with the commission as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, all right. So diving into our financial summaries and revenue tables. So at our very highest level, this is just giving the commission an example or the information as we're looking at all of our different funds and where those different revenue sources are. So as you can see, the general fund has the highest revenue generation. And then I'm not going to take too much time on each one of these different slides, but this was one of those Government Finance Officers Association best practices that you're including historical revenue analysis for each one of your largest revenue sources. So at a prior workshop, we brought forward and talked a little bit about how we're calculating some of our ad valorem revenues. I did receive a question from from a community member that was asking about the 3%, why we're saying that there's going to be a 3% reduction in our ad valorem. The reason there is what we received from Pinellas County was showing that our taxable value went down 3%. So that's where that figure is coming from when we received that tax roll information. So unless there's any questions on any one of these revenue slides, I'm going to click through them if that's okay.
I do have several folks that have reached out about this declining property value and the property tax revenues. And I saw earlier that you projected a certain amount of revenue. What if in future years we don't make that? And how are you going to offset that?
So within the financial policies, since we're tracking some of those, since it's tracking, part of that is tracking revenues and expenditures, and part of bringing forward each one of those quarterly reports to this commission is that we would notify you and say, hey, for example, ad valorem, we're looking at this being a reduction of X dollars. The other piece that we could certainly utilize is the commission approved at our last meeting the emergency bridge loan. And so one of those items is revenue losses, and our intent there would be to only leverage any of the interest on that. Now, if we needed to, if it was severe enough, then we could potentially utilize those funds for that. But I think our first and foremost would be looking at expense reduction to offset those revenues.
Devin, what is our total annual budget?
The total annual budget, expenditures,
Yes.
I want to say it's 120 million.
Okay, and how much is ad valorem?
Ad valorem, we are showing 15.1.
Okay, and so a 3% reduction on 15.1 million is roughly 220. Sorry, 3% would be $450,000.
Yes.
So a 3% reduction adds up to about $400,000 out of a $120 million budget. If we had a 10% reduction in ad valorem, it would be $1.5 million, which is still less than 1% of our annual budget. Not saying that's good. Also, the other reason why it's 3% and not more, because if you look at your bill from last year, if you lived here the last couple of years, you will see more than 3% decrease. The reason it's 3% cumulative is because you're factoring all the homes that were sold, that were homesteaded for 20, 30 years. Those went up 100, 200, in some cases 300%. And so for most residents, you will see a significantly larger than 3% reduction. But for us as a city overall, when you average out all the homes out, it ends up being about 3%.
I think that's a really good call out. And the other addition that I would add is when we were looking at this information, historically we've just taken the 3.0913 or whatever that millage is times the 1,000 against the taxable value. What we did this year is we looked at how many of our residents take that 4% discount rate. And so that's a conservative estimate. If for some reason, 70 or only 60% or 50% of our residents decided not to take that discount rate, then that would increase that ad valorem. But the intent there was just to add that another level of a conservative budget estimate for those ad valorem taxes, knowing and looking at how our community operates, which isn't something that we've historically done.
Thank you both for the clarification. Again, it's just one of the things that folks have reached out, not only have we seen property values decline, but some folks have actually seen their property taxes increase. So it's just something that's out there, and I just wanted to point it out. So thank you.
Did you say that our expenditures were 120 million?
That's inclusive of capital as well. Inclusive
of capital?
Yes.
Okay. Because our revenue is about 90.6.
Yes, so when you have that situation, what we're looking to do is to tap into those fund balances or reserve, and that's how we balance the budget. So a balanced budget is available revenues plus reserves minus expenditures is how you balance.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and click through some of these revenue slides.
1 second on the half-cent tax. What is our total takings or receivables for that?
On a given year, it's anywhere from 700,000 to 800,000 on that half cent.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so again, this is just a high-level summary where we're looking at the revenues that we have by fund. And then when we're looking at our expenditures, this is looking, I apologize, 112 million, sorry about that. When we're looking at the different expenditures that we have in each fund, you can see that general fund followed by our capital improvement fund are those expenditures. I think it's important to call out that the general fund expenditures is showing that high amount because it's inclusive of any of those transfers that we're transferring over to our capital improvement fund or over to the resiliency fund as recommended. This is our highest level budget summary. So this is taking all of our governmental funds as well as our proprietary funds and showing our revenues and expenditures kind of at that global level, if you will. This is the area where we had talked about where we're including that strategic roadmap that we met with Commission back in June on. And so when we're looking at that policy direction, how can we align the roadmap with our budgetary information? And then looking at our fund balance. So this is what we're looking at for the 35% or recommending for the 35% reserve. So that approximately 9 million is looking at everything above that highlighted $19.2 million. So what that's saying is 35% of all of our operating expenditures is what we're recommending for a fund balance reserve. So the 25 plus the 10% is what we're recommending. And the reason why we would recommend this is a good example. If the city were in a situation where, say, they had two events like a Helene and Milton and another Helene and Milton, and this number doubles, then the commission might say, hey, we want closer to 70% reserve because we know how expensive it is to respond to those emergencies. So that's the recommendation, to review these on an annual basis. Or if on the flip side of that, and the optimistic side is we have several years or decades where we don't have that, then the commission might say, hey, let's look to bring that percentage down on the fund balance. So that's where that $9 million is being recommended as our fund balance reserve. So kind of zeroing in on our general fund, again, what this is looking at is what makes up those different buckets of funding for the city. You can see that our largest area is on taxes. And then when we're looking at our expenditures, our largest component there is other uses, and those are going to be those transfers to the other funds that we're recommending. This is a breakdown of by department, how those expenditures in the general fund are tracking. So non-departmental, which again is our area where we're making those transfers out, or we might have a debt payment in that area. That's our largest bucket of funding, followed by our fire and EMS. There wasn't any changes to the building fund from the prior workshop number 4. So our resiliency fund, the commission can see here that those intergovernmental revenues, so 2 of those projects that we're recommending be moved to this fund did have some grant revenues associated with them. One of those is the community seawall projects. The other is the watershed management plan. And as well as the 5.8 million from that coastal vulnerabilities is being recommended to move over here. There's also a $3.2 million fund balance, and so the option that the commission has here is for opportunities for us to look at grant matches or for future adaptation projects. For example, when the city's looking at a grant opportunity, anywhere from a 25% city match to a 75% state or federal is an option that we'd be looking at. This gives us that opportunity or that flexibility to say, let's apply for some of those grants. We didn't have any changes to the multimodal fund in the event that those MOUs that were discussed at the last commission will bring forward budget changes for anything that could be impacted here as well. In our capital fund, you can see here that we did look to increase that other sources. So we did look to increase anything over that 35% to the capital projects fund. And a lot of that is going to Fire Station 22. And then you'll see a slight reduction in that intergovernmental revenue for any projects that were previously in the general fund capital projects over to the resiliency fund. We also have about $1.3 million in that ending fund balance for 2026, which provides an opportunity for projects, again, grant matching, and just different opportunities for the commission to consider. Fleet fund, this would be a reduction in expenses. As we mentioned, we pulled out 3 of those vehicles, so that's a reduction in expenses there. And then diving into our proprietary funds or enterprise funds, this is the high-level summary of all of those funds. Looking at our wastewater enterprise fund, we did not have any changes to that. Reclaimed water, I think the piece here, as we continue to look at any of those fee studies on any one of these funds, we would bring back a budget ordinance for the commission to consider with the recommendations around those fee studies. So that would be a forthcoming amendment after the budget is approved. The other component here, as we're looking at each one of these enterprise funds, and once we get the fee study, would be to consider and look at opportunities for fund balance policies for each one of these funds as well. Same thing with our parking fund. We do have that parking study ongoing right now as well, and so any changes to this will be brought back to the commission. We didn't have any changes from our prior workshop to this workshop on what were recommended for funded positions by department. And then in our capital improvement plan, I did go through and highlight any projects that we're recommending that were either a reappropriation project or a project that was moved or a project that was increased. So the resiliency fund has those projects that we've already spoken about, as well as the 2025 reappropriation projects. And then the bigger call out is on Fire Station 22. We pulled forward an additional $2 million into fiscal year 2026, where previously that was $5 million in workshop number 4. And again, those highlighted projects are reappropriation projects from 25 to 26. So I'll kind of move through these capital improvement plan projects descriptions. One of the questions we did receive, and again, I will summarize all the questions that we've gotten thus far from the community, but one question was around shell alleys as well as our mitigation and management maintenance projects and some of our enterprise funds. So the shell alleys, there is budget within our public services operating budget for some of those projects, as well as maintenance and repair funding within our operation budget as well for some of those projects. I'm just going to keep rolling through a lot of those descriptions, talk a little bit again about our opportunities that we have coming up. So following, as soon as we close out this workshop, we launch again with the budget, and if there's any discussion or continuation conversation from the commission, that'll give us another opportunity to hear any public comment from the community on the tentative budget. And then on September 8th, we'll come back with our first public hearing, our millage and budget first hearing, and then on 9/22 is when we'll have that second public hearing on the millage as well as the budget.
Thank you, Devin. Just going back to Commissioner Robinson's point from earlier, City Manager, we had a conversation at one of the July or June budget meetings that for 2026, the cycle going into 27, is that we have community engagement earlier in the process. So just to add that to the calendar for next year. It's good that we have the 2 in September, but really at that point all the work has been done, right? So it'd be nice if it had something, maybe one in the beginning and then one somewhere in the middle after the first or second revision or so. And it could be just as simple as making a change to how we do the workshops by actually inviting public comment at those workshops. We don't have to schedule a separate meeting, but I think that was something that we discussed at one of the meetings before that. And then Commissioner Maldonado, I apologize, I think I may have misunderstood your question. You said you had some residents whose tax bills actually went up?
Yeah, I have had at least 2 persons reach out and tell me that, so it was kind of surprising. I mean, my home value dropped 25-26%.
Wow.
But in this case, there were recent purchases, so I think it's based on comparative market analysis, but it's something that I encourage them to reach out to the Pinellas County appraiser's office and seek, either a reduction or an exemption based on their status, whether it's veterans, homestead, or seniors.
Yeah. Yeah, so maybe if they bought in 23 or 24, or before the storms, that might have reset. If they bought in 23, it would have reset, and then, yeah.
They're anomalies, but, at the same time, I think it's just fair to just talk about it, mention it, and let them know that there's
Yeah.
resources out there in case other people are facing the same challenge. But thank you for both of you for explaining that, in terms of how it's important, but it's not going to be a critical need, and we have ways to offset that. So.
Yes, and I know one of the other questions we had was just around some of our enterprise fund fees. So what people are paying for water, reclaimed water, wastewater. Obviously, this commission is aware, but for the public, that's not something that we're looking to increase today. That'll be a result of those fee studies. So that was another one of those questions. But again, I'll outline those, and if it's helpful for the community, happy to put together maybe an FAQ about the budget process and send that out as part of the weekly ops, but certainly open to any opportunities for improvement, and definitely appreciate the feedback that we've received thus far.
Thank you. Questions, comments?
My only comment, and I know we talked about this, was just at this forum as being, I know we're under the gun on you being new coming on and finding out what historically has happened, what was done, and running with that. Just that I found that some of the workshops were a bit fast with a lot of information in that, because we got the information on a Thursday, a meeting's on a Tuesday. It's a lot of info as well as agenda to follow through and read and grasp in 5 days, basically. I don't think any of us got a weekend because we spent it reading and researching, so it was tough. I would prefer to see us getting the info well in advance and having more time to look at it as well. I'm sure that the Budget and Finance Committee would like that as well. So just putting that out there.
And I absolutely appreciate that. I definitely want to comment on that too, because it's certainly not a precedence that we want to set. That this is kind of a unique year, and I think you highlighted a lot of the reasons why. Our intent next year would be that we get the presentation out to the Finance Budget Review Committee 2 weeks prior to their meeting, which would provide 3 weeks prior to the commission, and then we'll inlay in their recommendations at that point. But that would be the only piece that would be kind of a short review process for you all, but that would provide 3 weeks in advance of the meeting for the commission, the community, as well as the Finance Budget Review Committee. But certainly have appreciated the grace and the conversations that we've had on this process. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions for Devin?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Okay, so this concludes this budget workshop, and the next time we're going to be reviewing the budget is going to be at the first commission meeting on September 8th. That is a Monday, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, so we have to adjust our schedule based on the county schedule. And so that commission meeting will be on September 8th. And then the same with the second meeting that will also be on a Monday, and it'll be September 22nd. Okay, thank you, everyone. We are adjourned.